Hey there, and welcome to February. February is where we are talking about and digging into comparison. Why we compare, how it holds us back, how it actually can motivate us. It is a natural part of human behavior to compare. And in dog sports, it's really easy to get caught up in what others are achieving, whether it's other handlers, other dogs that are like similar age or in the same classes as you, or even litter mates. So whether you're watching someone cue when you're struggling or seeing someone's highlight reel on social media, which again, it's the highlight reel, like nobody posts like the bad stuff, or you're feeling behind in your own progress, comparison can quickly turn your frustration, or turn into, I should say, turn into frustration and self-doubt. It can be a confidence killer. So this month, we're going to try to get you to break free of that and at least break free from the negative comparison and shift your focus more inward, more on your own progress, and then use comparison as a tool for growth rather than just a source of discouragement, right? Or a frustration. I really believe that when used correctly, comparison can work for us. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to backtrack any on the famous quote that comparison is the thief of joy. I believe that to be true. I believe that is the case for most of us. And so that's why I think this month, these lessons are so important. So the first week, we're going to just talk about kind of get a level set, why we compare, how it holds us back. Then lesson 2, we're going to like kind of refocus, our attention on our own journey with some tools to do that. And then week 3, we're going to use comparison constructively to inspire us and get us to improve and maybe even inspire us to like get off the couch, right? And then the 4th lesson, we're going to talk about some like practical tools because I like to be practical. All right. So why we compare? I don't think this is a big mystery, right? But I think the biggest source of comparison, or the biggest reason we compare, is kind of something that people don't vocalize or talk about really, and that is because we are craving measurement. I mean, I don't know about you, but like I think that a lot of times training is very lonely, very solitary. Even if you're training in a group class, you're not necessarily getting a lot of feedback on this is how you're doing overall, right? You're in a class, you're doing the sequence, you're doing the exercises that, whatever your instructor is asking you to do, or maybe your online instructor, wherever you're getting instruction, and you're doing it and they're like, great job, or fix this, fix that, the rest of it's great. Whatever the feedback we're getting. But that's so in the moment, right? That feedback is just on like that one thing. And so I feel like for us, and maybe I'm over personalizing here, but I feel like every once in a while, we just want to know, like, how are we stacking up? How are we doing? Sports are such a comparative thing anyway, right? There's somebody's winning, somebody's losing, somebody's queuing, somebody's not queuing, somebody's first, second, third places and so forth. Like there are podiums. Some people are on the podium, some people aren't. So there is like some sort of a ranking sometimes, but sometimes there's not. Sometimes just a bunch of people queue in the class. You're one of them. And okay, was I better or the same as everybody? Like, how am I doing? And I think it's that craving to understand how we're doing almost in a bigger picture. Like, oh my God, you're like, wouldn't it be nice sometimes that like your dog is 4, your dog has accomplished so much more in these areas. And if you have these goals, like you should work on this, Like I'm using my robot voice because that doesn't exist and it just feels like a weird thing. But I think that sometimes we want to like zoom out and we're like, but is my dog, are we progressing? Are we on time? Are we late? Is there something else I should be doing? It's just all of these pressures. So I personally have come to the, I don't know why to say it's a conclusion. It's a working theory that I think because we crave measurement and feedback so much that we are constantly then looking to other places to compare to see how we're doing. Am I better than that dog? Am I better than that handler? Am I worse than that dog? Am I worse than that handler? Like all the other, are all the other litter mates already doing things, or are we all doing different things? Like we're just I just think we're hungry for the feedback and for someone, for once in a while, just to pat us on the back and be like, girl, you're doing everything you can. This is amazing. Like, keep going. You got this. Like, you're doing great. I mean, wouldn't that be nice, right? So there is a science of comparison, right? I mean, comparison is hardwired into our brains. It really is. Like, anthropologically, over millennia, like, we are trying to figure out and assess where we stand anthropologically, socially, right? I mean, that's why comparison sort of exists to begin with. Are we fitting in? Are we achieving? Are we doing the right things? We go to school. That just validates that. We go to work, more comparison. So we're constantly in different environments where comparison is normal and the standard of measurement is relative to others, right? At work, right? It's not just on a regular, like a plane scale, right? It's kind of relative to your other coworkers. And so when we add the competitive ness to the whole thing, of course there's comparison, again, because other competitors coming up, etc., in our case other dogs, so it's just there all the time. So something that is there all the time in our environment isn't necessarily bad. Okay, it is, as most things are, the story we tell about it and the big deal we might make out of it, given some comparison in some specific moments, right? We get to decide if this is a big deal or not. We get to add our emotion into it because, yeah, maybe on paper, this dog or this handler is doing X, Y, and Z, and you're not, but we tend to add this whole emotional component about what that means. All right. And it usually contains some sort of self-destructive talk, that really works to erode our confidence. And that's the stuff we're going to talk about in the coming weeks, about really stopping, really putting a stop to that and really realizing that that's just the story you're telling. That yes, statistically speaking, there are differences between all of us, but the story behind it is what really matters, right? Because that's the emotion. That's what makes you motivated or unmotivated. That's what makes you feel fabulous or terrible, right? That's all behind it. So comparison's hardwired. We're not ever going to get away from it. We're just going to learn how to live with it a lot more harmoniously. Okay. In dog sports, of course, we're constantly watching others at trials, in classes, watching people on social media, hearing about someone's success, and not only can those moments be like fodder for like more comparison, but they can also be really triggering. And because it can trigger an old issue that you might have, or like some other dog or some other handler or some other comparison, and it just might all come up again. So it's not even only the comparison of like blue to green, if you will, like two different dogs, two different journeys, two different handlers, two different journeys, but it can actually even trigger like a time when green was a problem, right? And of course I'm making that up, but like it can also have another layer, is my point, that is triggering, maybe like alerts your self-judgment, gets doubt, even resentment. You could really resent somebody else for their success. I hear this a lot when some people are trialing young dogs in agility, for instance, or in any sport for that matter. And they're like, oh, I can't believe they're running that dog at that age. That dog's just going to have injuries, blah, 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 blah. Well, it sounds a lot like resentment to me, right? Like you're resenting them for trialing too soon. It's their business. Maybe that dog is ready. Maybe, they have beautiful, clean, shiny x-rays that have been framed in the X-ray Hall of Fame. Like who's to know, right? But I think that we can resent others for what they're doing, or maybe even get mad at ourselves and feel like we're missing out. Right? I think FOMO is like one of the biggest, fastest emotions that we can identify with comparison. But some of these other ones are kind of sneaky, and they are there if we kind of even look beyond the FOMO sometimes. Okay. So obviously there are consequences when we negatively compare. Okay, and we're going to talk about positive compare later. But when we negatively compare, obviously consequences of losing confidence, right? Getting really extra frustrated with your dog. Maybe even you have a short fuse because like you're asking your dog to do something and in the back of your mind, you're like, Fluffy can already do this. Like, why can't you? You know? And your dog's like, what the hell's the matter with you? Like, I'm just learning this now, you know? Unnecessary pressure is another consequence of this negative comparison, right? Now we're putting on that we've got this extra layer of pressure that we've just, plucked out of the sky and to apply to our lives now because we're now in a secret race with this other person or dog or team. Okay. And the most important thing for me about negative comparison is this. It shifts our focus away from our own progress and outward onto someone else's journey. And I'm pausing for effect because I think that that's huge. When we think about the fact that let's say we only have so many energy units, let's pretend it's 100 energy units a day. Are you going to give away 20 energy units to somebody else in their journey? Like, why? Why don't you use those 20, units of energy to grab a stick of cheese and go train something? So I think that like fixation that some people can get, I mean, it can go too far, right? Fixation is an extreme. But the point is you are shifting your focus away from your own journey, your own to-do list, your own training list, your own goals, and onto someone else and someone else's journey. Okay. And that, like, what is the point? Like, what are you going to do with that? What does that get you? What is the value add out of that? Okay. And I get it. It can be addicting. But remember, you're searching for that measurement and you're not going to find it on their Facebook page. Okay. All right. There's a myth also of fairness, I think, that we all kind of have on some level. All right. Where like fairness, I don't know, from like when we were on the playground or whatever, like that, if everybody's getting a piece of chocolate, they all should be the same size, or brownie or what, who knows? Apparently I'm hungry, but like whatever that is, we have this like innate sense of like, it should be fair. Everything should be fair. And so sometimes when we look outward, again, we're comparing ourselves to somebody else, sometimes somebody else's highlight reel even, we think that, oh, that's not fair. That's not fair. That person is lucky, or that person got the better dog in the litter, or everything comes easy to that person, or whatever. And so what we forget is that everybody has a different starting point, has different experiences, has different obstacles, has different ability to be able to train or what have you. Like, it's all different. So when we compare ourselves to someone who has maybe different resources, different amount of like training time or training opportunities or ability to travel or different experience or history or what have you, like it's not apples to apples, first of all. And it's never going to be like this kind of deep down fairness thing that you've come to like kind of the world kind of tells you that that's what it should be. There should be justice and fairness and all of that. And while that's true in a lot of cases, it's not really the whole story when it comes to us comparing to others. And so there's not that, because to just say fairness on the outside doesn't take into account everybody's individual journeys and starting points and work ethics and so forth. Okay. All right. So of course, I feel like I end so many lessons with this, but the first thing is awareness. It's always awareness. Okay. We want to figure out, and that's why like I'm kind of parsing these lessons a little bit like smaller, because in this first lesson, I want you to really think about the kinds of comparison you usually fall for. Right? Everybody's got a kind of comparison, right? Like it's very easy for me to get jealous that someone else is out there trialing every weekend when that's not my where I am right now, right? Or for instance, doing a lot of agility when I've almost like, I consider Moxie almost semi-retired at this point, right? So that in terms of comparison, that'll get me going fast, right? Is it FOMO, or is it me, being sad about the fact that I want to be trialing more with Moxie? Or is it just, where I am in my journey and, what I'm prioritizing, and the fact that I have 2 young dogs? Is that just all shifting? So for me, like, taking a look at that is really important, because I think that the other part of this is not all comparison is the same. When you feel yourself comparing to someone else and you think like, oh, it must be FOMO because that's my comparison thing, I always feel left out, well, maybe that comparison isn't that. Maybe it's triggering something else. Maybe it's triggering a time when you thought that you weren't a good enough handler to train your dogs. And so that's what's coming up for you now. Okay. So I want you to really pay attention this week of like the different flavors, let's call it, of comparison that bubble up for you, and what that looks like and what that feels like, and what's the story you tell yourself when you encounter these moments. Like, for me, when people post, typically on Mondays, right, on Facebook, like, here's my great weekend, it was so fabulous, da, 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 da. Like, I am rarely, like super rarely, jealous of anybody celebrating, because I truly am one of those people who believes that like there's enough green ribbons for everybody, like good for you, like that's amazing, like super happy for you. But then I might be like, oh, I wish I could have trialed this weekend, or I was just home doing nothing, or whatever. That like, then there's a thing that comes. I'm still genuinely happy for that person. But it may make me be like, oh, I better start getting to work, or, I better go check my goals on Monday and see what I want to work on this week, or what have you. So it's not always the same, and it's not always the same trigger. And you really might have different flavors of comparison, and they're not all equal, and they don't kind of need from you the same prescription, the same antidote, maybe, like, to be addressed. Okay, each one is going to tell a little different story. So it's kind of an interesting thing to dig into this week, but I really challenge you to do that and to see where that takes you and what you learn out of that. Okay? All right, so that's your homework. Go there. Think about comparison. If nothing comes across your comparison mindset this week, think about a past thing, or think about some past things that like would trigger you, and see if you can't dig in and figure out what are the kind of likely scenarios, and then what is like the worst thing. You know what I mean? Like, what's the thing that like you're like, oh, now that you're saying that, some things like, yeah, I feel kind of this way or that way, but then some things are a downright trigger. All right. And I think there's a difference. And I think that knowing those things ahead of time can really help us, and certainly will inform the next lessons that we do throughout this month. Okay. All right. I'll talk to you next week.